October 1st, 1932. Game 3 of the 29th World Series. The AL champion New York Yankees travel to play the NL champion Chicago Cubs in Wrigley Field in Chicago, Illinois. Yankees are up 2-0 in the series. 49,986 people in attendance. 13 future Hall of Famers played in this series, which is a record. Heading into the series, the New York Yankees had a 107-47 record, while the Chicago Cubs had a 90-64 record. The New York Yankees were led by second-year manager Joe McCarthy, who was fired by the Cubs in 1930. The Chicago Cubs were led by first-year manager Charlie Grimm, who also served as the team's first baseman. Since the New York Yankees traded for outfielder pitcher Babe Ruth in 1920, the Yankees have played in 6 World Series and won 3 of them up to this point. This World Series would be their 7th appearance and first in 4 years. Ruth was 37 years old and not getting any younger. By many people's standards, Ruth was the greatest player ever up to this point. The Cubs are also playing in their 7th World Series and have won 3 so far. Game 1, the Yankees won 12-6. Game 2, the Yankees won 5-2 in what would be Babe Ruth's last World Series game played at Yankee Stadium. Throughout this series, both teams continued to trash talk one another for a multitude of reasons. Whether that be about the firing of Joe McCarthy or about a trade that sent Cubs shortstop Mark Koenig from the Yankees to the Detroit Tigers in 1930. These quote-unquote bench jockeys would play a major part later on. Now, Game 3 would change the sports world forever. 1928 AL wins leader George Pipgras started the game for New York, while 1927 NL wins leader Charlie Root started the game for Chicago. In the top of the first inning, Babe Ruth launched a 3-run home run to right center field, which scored center fielder Earl Combs and third baseman Joe Sewell. In the bottom of the first inning, Cubs right fielder Kiki Cooler hit an RBI double, which scored second baseman Billy Herman. The Yankees were up 3-1 after the first inning. In the top of the third inning, Yankees first baseman Lou Gehrig hit a solo home run. In the bottom of the third inning, Kiki Cooler hit a solo home run and Charlie Grimm hit an RBI double, which scored center fielder Johnny Moore. The Yankees now held a 4-3 lead. In the bottom of the fourth inning, Cubs shortstop Billy Jergs hit a double on a ball missed by Babe Ruth in left field. This fueled the Cubs fans and bench for more jokes. Third baseman Woody English reached first on an error by Yankee second baseman Tony Lazzeri, and this would score Billy Jergs. After 4 innings, the Yankees and Cubs were tied 4-4. On to the top of the 5th inning. The first Yankee batter was Joe Sewell, who grounded out to shortstop on a 1-2 pitch. Babe Ruth stepped up to the plate. On the first pitch, Ruth took strike 1. Immediately after the ball crossed the plate, Babe Ruth made a gesture towards the Cubs bench. Cubs fans and players continued throwing jabs at Ruth while he was at bat. Throughout the at-bat, Babe Ruth did not back down and yelled his own insults. Ruth took a ball, another ball, and then he did the unthinkable. Ruth took strike 2 and proceeded to point in front of him with his index and middle fingers. Some believe he was pointing to the pitcher. Some believe he was pointing to the flagpole out in center field. Ruth and his teammates afterwards state that it was towards the flagpole. Some spectators state he pointed at the pitcher. Then there are some who believe he pointed at the Cubs bench again, which seems like a small group of people who think this. The legend of where he was pointing, or his intentions for pointing, have changed over the years. But one thing is for certain, it was a promise of what would come. On the next pitch, Cubs pitcher Charlie Root would throw a curveball. The Great Bambino, crowding the plate and nearly stepping out, which would have been an out, made contact with the ball. This ball traveled anywhere from 440 to 490 feet to deep center field for the game-leading home run. As the Babe rounded first, he looked over at the silent Chicago dugout and made a waving off gesture. Heading towards third, Ruth made a pushing motion towards the opposing team's bench. As he crossed home plate, he could hardly contain his smile. Even the best player ever was impressed at what he had done. Lou Gehrig was the next batter, and he too would hit a solo home run. The Yankees would win Game 3 of the World Series 7-5 and finish the sweep with a 13-6 victory the next day in Game 4. The event was questioned only where Babe Ruth was pointing. Ruth himself has exaggerated the story quite a bit over his life, sometimes saying he started pointing when he went up to bat, that he had yelled out he was going to hit the next pitch past the flagpole, that he pointed directly at the pitcher and yelled "strike one" after the first strike, that he pointed towards the Cubs dugout and told them he had a big one left, or that he simply pointed towards the center field area. Cubs players on the field seemed to deny anything at all going on, but everyone else on the field, umpires, Yankees players, and spectators would all disagree. Charlie Root has a story that Ruth never pointed at all, and that Babe Ruth told him later he did it because it would make a great story. What is interesting is the photos which surfaced of the event show Root never saw Ruth pointing because Charlie Root's back was facing the batter. Now, let's analyze the film. Now, this is my theory, and others could share different theories, and I would love to hear them in the comments below. This is not a definitive answer, this is just my theory. My theory is the first gesture he makes towards the Cubs bench. I think it's pretty obvious where his arm is. It is hard for me to believe that this is not intended for the Cubs bench or even spectators in the area. The issue is the next pitch. As the catcher is throwing the ball back to the pitcher, there's a gesture Ruth makes. His arm is not fully extended, otherwise you would see some of his hand. He could have been pointing with one finger to say he's got one more strike left to the pitcher, or one more big hit in him. He could have been pointing with two fingers to say to the pitcher, that was your second strike. He could have pointed to center field, and maybe the pitcher did not recognize it at first, so he pointed again. He makes the gesture twice, right as the catcher throws, almost like he wants the pitcher or players to recognize what he's doing or about to do. 92 years later, and nobody knows the complete story. But doesn't that make it more special? Think about every legendary play in sports history. Many of them have controversy surrounding them, like the Immaculate Reception in the NFL. Over the course of baseball history, players have said or made gestures that they were going to hit home runs and proceed to hit ones. But not at this magnitude, at this moment in one of the biggest games in sports history. This moment only added to the lore of Babe Ruth. He was already the greatest of all time before he called his shot, and afterwards it added to the otherworldly mark on sports history. I'm Jordan of Old Legacy, and thank you for listening.